I'm Dave Shrier. I'm the Managing Director of MIT Connection Science. I'm coming to you here from Cambridge, Massachusetts at my office in the MIT Media Lab. And I'm looking forward to speaking to you today about our topic, Future Commerce, Reinventing Markets with Blockchain. As you're probably aware, MIT is the epicenter of envisioning the future and commercializing it, translating university innovation into real-world impact. One of the areas that's been gaining a great deal of excitement over the past several years is the area of FinTech innovation. And in particular, within that, we have quite a bit of research and activity and startups around innovations with the blockchain. So our Future Commerce initiative at MIT spans a wide range of innovations in FinTech, but today's conversation under the Future Enterprise Program with the European Commission will be focused on blockchain. We're going to start off with a brief introduction to what we mean by future commerce, explore a primer on what is the blockchain, how does it work. Very, very basic. This is a non-technical discussion just intended to give you a familiarity with some of the principles. We'll then get into some applications, how blockchain is changing money and payments, how blockchain is changing financial markets, how it could possibly change insurance, and even what's happening in areas as arcane as personal data privacy. Finally, we'll talk about a few of the many areas that represent potential opportunity for applying this technology. Future Commerce is not only an initiative, it's also a class. We teach here at MIT. The students came to us after getting very excited about blockchain and Bitcoin and FinTech and said, you know, can you organize something to help us explore this area further? So Professor Alex Sandy Pentland, who advises the UN Secretary General on data, as well as the World Economic Forum, Google, and others. Brian Ford, the head of the newly formed MIT Digital Currency Initiative. Joost Bonson, who has taught for now 15 years on entrepreneurship at MIT, and myself created this class this fall. And we're very excited to see a large number of students show up and take the course and engage with creating new ventures built around future commerce. And in particular, probably 30 to 40% of the startups that came out of this class are focused on blockchain-related technologies. So that was very exciting to see. FinTech is hot. The chart I'm showing you now is representative of deal volume over the last several years globally in financial technology venture capital. You'll see through 2014, there's a little over $12 billion US of investment. Year to date through September of this year, we've already surpassed that and are tracking to have a blowout year. So a lot of money is pouring into FinTech innovation, and a lot of that is focused on the blockchain. So within our Future Commerce class, we explored themes around security and privacy, money and payments, markets, and infrastructure. And we will touch on several of those topics today. Today is intended to be a very high-level overview. We're not going to go into a ton, but we thought it would be helpful to introduce some of these concepts. All right, let's make the leap forward. Hopefully at least some of you share my love of Star Wars and are looking forward to Episode 8. So let's warp into hyperspace. What's the blockchain? So if you've been reading about Bitcoin and all this other activity going on in financial technology innovation, you've been hearing about the blockchain. The Economist magazine even ran a feature section on disruption through blockchain. So what is the blockchain? Well, first of all, it's important to note that there are many blockchains. So when you read a popular newspaper referring to Bitcoin and blockchain interchangeably, really what they mean is the Bitcoin blockchain, which is one of several kinds of blockchains. It's a form of a distributed ledger. And I will explain what distributed and decentralized ledgers mean in a minute. But let's start with the very basic building blocks of what is the blockchain. You start with something called a genesis block. This is an original, let's think of it as a little container that holds a number. You then perform some calculations on that number to create a new number. It's called a hash. So when you perform a hash on the genesis block, you perform some calculations, you end up with a new number that represents block 1, the first block in the blockchain beyond the genesis block. And so calculations might be built around things like, I want to transfer 1 Bitcoin from myself to someone else, and so I perform some calculations that make account of that and put it into block 1. Time passes, and then whoever I gave that Bitcoin to wants to give it to someone else. They then take the number in block 1 and they perform some more calculations on it. They get block 2. So these blocks are linked together in a chain. The reason why it's called a chain is that it's impossible to get block 2 without having both block 1 and the genesis block. It's impossible to get block 1 without having the genesis block. So what you get is an immutable record of every single time you do something to, let's say, that Bitcoin. We keep track of it. It's in a ledger, and it's in a chain because of these calculations, because the calculation for block 1 is built on the genesis block, because the calculation for block 2 is built on block 1. You can't game the system very easily. You have this record from chain link to link to link in the chain, and so on. So that's a blockchain. Now, what makes it particularly interesting is that it's running on a network of servers. So each of these black dots that you see on the screen now represent a node or a server in the network that is performing these calculations for this blockchain. So this could, for example, represent the Bitcoin blockchain network, but it could represent another distributed network as well. And so it's not just one server that's performing calculations on the blockchain, but several of them. And they do these calculations that says that I gave my Bitcoin to somebody else, and then they vote. And as long as 51% of those little dots on the screen say, yes, David gave his Bitcoin to someone else, then the record will get updated and changed. So it's very democratic. This also means that it's very hard to manipulate, because you have all of these different nodes all over the world, and you have to subvert more than half of them in order to game the system. So let's go back to this concept of ledgers, right? So I've mentioned decentralized and distributed ledgers. What are ledgers? What are these things, right? So a centralized system, and this is from a report by the World Economic Forum, a centralized system would be, for example, like the euro. The European Central Bank, the ECB, asserts the value of the euro. It says, we are keeping track of all of the euros in a central ledger, and if you want to do anything with euros, you eventually have to talk to us, and then we'll tell you how many euros there are and where they are, and then you can go do things with them. So a transacting party who wants to do something with euros ultimately needs to connect with the ECB. A decentralized system, on the other hand, has several intermediaries. They each keep a ledger. They each keep track of that information. And so you as a transacting party request information from an intermediary, and they connect with other intermediaries perhaps, and so on. A distributed ledger, however, has one true source for each piece of information, and it's in this highly webbed network. So when I want to move something around, or if I want to move money around, I have a copy of the ledger on my server, and everyone else has a copy of the ledger on their servers. and we go through a process in order to update our copies. And you just saw from our prior slide about how the blockchain works what that process is. There's a series of calculations, and then there's some voting that says, yes, we've updated the ledger, and then everyone updates their copy of the ledger. So let's pause on this for a minute and think about, what does this mean if instead of the European Central Bank deciding on the value of the euro, those of us on this phone call could create our own future enterprise coin. We could create orange coin or purple coin, and we could decide amongst us how much that's worth and whether or not I've passed my future enterprise coin to someone else. Well, first of all, it's extremely fast. If you don't have to go to a central authority and get them to go through processes and approve something, but you can just go to a peer and directly exchange something with them, it's much faster. It's completely transparent because remember, everybody has a copy of this ledger. This ledger is not held in some central place where you have to wait for the European Central Bank to tell you what's going on with the euro, but instead, we all know all the time what's going on with our purple coins. Totally transparent, and it's direct. Now I can transact directly with people instead of having to go through intermediaries. This is revolutionary. We're removing this essential role of sovereign government and putting it in the hands of people and businesses. It's lower cost. It's more secure. Because you remember what I said earlier about the voting system. So the voting system would mean you'd have to subvert 51% of the people involved in this whole market in order to commit fraud. Whereas with a central system, you just have to hack into the central server. And it's more convenient. Now I don't need to go through a bunch of intermediaries to do something. I can just go directly. Okay, so let's pause for a minute and think about this. And I'll leave this screen up. Once we have this distributed system where the power is in the hands of all of the participants in the system, what does it mean? What can you do? I will tell you this, that about 23 of the largest financial services institutions in the world are worried enough about what this disruptive technology means for their business that they've formed a consortium to try and explore developing blockchain technologies. So what can we do with this decentralized, nay, distributed system? Well, let's look at money and payments. If I want to, let's say, send some dollars over to Europe, I want to give somebody some money or buy something in Europe with euros, I want to use dollars. I have to go through a complex network of my bank, a processing network, a central bank, maybe another central bank, another processing network, a bank in Europe, before I can give someone a euro. It's expensive, it's complicated, and it takes 3 days or longer. So in this age of electronic instant communications, it still takes 3 days to move money. Under the disruptive system that a technology like blockchain allows, I can just go almost direct. I mean, I may have to go through a company like Circle, but I do need very little in order to move money from here to there. So it's much, much less expensive, and it's much faster. So if you look at the top chart, every one of those arrows represents some fees that someone is taking. It's a bunch of money that's flowing around in those intermediaries that makes the banks very, very profitable. If you've ever traveled for leisure, I just got back from a business trip, and every time I went to a restaurant and I used my credit card overseas, there was a little transaction fee that was taken. There was also another fee for exchanging the currency, and then there were some other fees on top of that. all those fees in the middle go away when you have this distributed system. Look at financial markets, right? So we had the chief technology officer of one of the biggest financial markets in the world come and speak in our class this fall, and he is very focused on what I'm about to share with you. Let's say under today's rules you want to buy some shares of Apple stock. You like the Apple MacBook that I'm using to display today's presentation, and you want to support the company because you think it's a good company and going to keep selling more MacBooks. So you want to take some of your euros and convert them into stock of Apple. Again, there's a complex network of intermediaries. You have to turn your money into electronic money, and then you have to get it into the hands of your broker, and they go to an exchange, and they find people willing to sell Apple stock, and then the exchange works with something called the DTCC, which is another ledger and clearing operation that handles transfer of the ownership rights of this stock. And then eventually, like, it goes to Apple. So it's expensive, it's complicated, and it can take up to 90 days. So this is something really important to bear in mind. If I'm Apple, if I'm running a company, and someone buys stock in my company, I don't know who that person is until as long as 90 days after they've bought the stock in my company, because of this complex network of intermediaries. You can probably guess where this is going. Under the new paradigm, with a digital exchange, I can directly connect with Apple and instantaneously get my shares of Apple, and Apple can instantaneously know who I am. It's cheap, much less expensive, and fast. And so in the words of this one financial services executive, he said, you know, the buyers of securities, whether it's you, the individual consumer, or you, the hedge fund or mutual fund, the buyers of securities are going to do better. And Apple is going to do better. The issuers of securities will do better. Everyone in between, the intermediaries, including the exchanges, are in trouble. Let's look at insurance. Here's another interesting financial market, right? So these little circles on the left-hand side of the screen, those represent people, risk. You know, individuals or businesses who want to buy insurance. So it's those of us on the phone. Today, if those of us on this call wanted to buy some insurance, we'd have to go to a bunch of different brokers. Maybe we'd even go through an online website to find a broker. There might even be another layer of intermediaries between the broker and the insurance company called the managing general agent and an underwriting process. And then the insurance company creates a risk pool. That risk pool is made up of all of the little insurance policies that we bought. And then they go and they sell it to buyers of risk. So you can tell there's a lot of layers in the system and a lot of fees and costs. With a direct distributed system like the blockchain, one possible future might be, just like is happening, in fact, in the online lending world, I could directly issue an insurance policy on myself to someone who wants to buy that risk. So if you're not familiar with a company like Lending Club or Prosper.com, they are enabling people to buy loans directly from people who are effectively directly from people who want to borrow money. The costs are a lot lower than credit cards. So instead of paying 15% interest on these loans, you, the person borrowing money, might pay 6%. But it's also good for the people on the other side of the transaction, because instead of getting 0 or 0.5% interest, which is where the US banks are, or in Europe, some markets have negative interest, meaning that you put cash in your bank account on a Friday and you have less cash in your bank account on a Monday. Instead of that, you actually can make some more interest. So just as with the direct lending market, there's an opportunity with direct insurance. Another possible future is that it might be easier for a group of people, let's say those of us on this call, we all decide we like each other, we're all smart, innovative people who are sophisticated about the future of commerce. Why don't we form our own little pool of insurance, and we'll insure each other? And there could be some other future. We don't know, and that's the exciting thing, that there's a lot of disruption that is about to hit the insurance market as a consequence of technologies like blockchain. Now let's get into an even more exotic area of data security. So this is a topic that is core for our work here at MIT in the Connection Science Group, because we're extending the work with the blockchain well beyond just currency or financial markets. So today, conventional wisdom for securing your data is to just make thicker and thicker walls. I'm speaking metaphorically, of course. What I mean is you have two-factor authentication instead of one-factor authentication. You have 256-bit encryption instead of 128-bit encryption. People keep trying to make thicker and thicker walls about their data. But they're still putting their data in one or a couple of consolidated piles. And so once a hacker breaks through those walls, they can have a field day. So Snowden, for example, was able to access large amounts of information by essentially getting 17 passwords. So almost all of the confidential, secure information of the United States government was accessible to Snowden through getting 17 passwords. In the future, you, me, a government, a company, could secure their data through the blockchain, through a distributed network that's encrypted. And so there's no one pile of information that's accessible. So even if you got my password, you'd only have one little piece of the information. And all the information lives out on this network in an encrypted form. So even if you could get into my machine, you'd only see encrypted data. So there's more information about this Enigma project at trust.mit.edu. The Internet Trust Consortium is a major project that we have underway, among other things, that uses blockchain for advanced data and security purposes. There are an array of commercial opportunities, and so if you are an entrepreneur and you're thinking about, what should I do next? Maybe I'm interested in this stuff with blockchain. You have a world of possibilities. A major trend that's striking the financial services industry is what's known as disaggregating the bank and the insurance company. So banks and insurance companies are big, giant organizations that have lots of different services that they offer to consumers. The FinTech world has started attacking them one by one on each layer of service or opportunity, and disruptive technology like blockchain makes that easier, more powerful, and lower cost to deliver. We saw several examples today of how blockchain technology can eliminate friction in a market. You can take out the middlemen. You can improve financial access. So we have a project underway currently in Latin America where we are trying to help government welfare payments be distributed through digital currencies. It eliminates fraud and corruption, it's easier to track, and it's faster to get money into people's hands. We could create a democratic form of identity. So today, you have an identity card of some kind. You have a passport or a driver's license or a university ID card or perhaps a combination of the three of those. And in the case of the passport and the driver's license, those are issued by the state. In a realm of democratic identity, we all could create trust amongst each other and validate for each other that I'm me, and you are you, and she is her, and he is him. Because this system is transparent, not just the identity system, but all aspects of what we do with blockchain, there's a potential to reduce fraud and waste. Because it's all digital, we've eliminated paper from the system, and we can do some very interesting things with the blockchain. We can have some enhanced analytics. We can even get into things like making it easier for farmers to get food to market faster by making it easier for them to buy their fertilizer on the one hand and produce on the other. And in fact, one of the startups that came out of our Future Commerce class at MIT this fall is doing exactly that. You could even make it easier in the digital world to transfer music to a friend. Today, you have to go to iTunes to buy music, and then you have certain rights that iTunes validates off of a central ledger, which keeps track of your rights. But with blockchain, the music itself could contain its control over rights. Possibilities are endless, from food and water to financial empowerment to democracy to entertainment. There are an array of opportunities for entrepreneurs to pursue using the blockchain. If you found this interesting and you think you might want to learn more and maybe even put together a business around the blockchain or other disruptive financial technology like advanced analytics or prediction markets, I encourage you to take our class that we are offering this spring. There's a pre-registration page at mit.getsmarter.ac/future_commerce. That's the URL that's up on the screen now. It's an 8-week digital intensive course. We'll bring in some of the world's leading experts from industry, government, and innovation. There's a personalized element to the experience, and at the successful completion of the course, you will get a certificate from MIT. More about our work in data analytics to build better societies can be found at connection.mit.edu. You can follow me on Twitter at David Shrier, and you can read about the Future Enterprise Project at futureenterprise.eu. So I hope that this has been a helpful introduction to the blockchain and to future commerce. We very much hope that you will join us this spring in our digital version of the course. We're also going to be experimenting with some novel educational technology to make the course experience more exciting. So please do sign up at mit.getsmarter.ac. And if we can figure out how the chat function works, I'll be happy to take some questions now. So I'm not seeing chat on my screen. I don't know if Feneretti, you are able to activate the chat.
Yes, Dave, I can see the questions and answers screen. I'm not sure how to make it visible to you right now.
Okay, do you want to just read me the questions and I'll answer them live? Why don't you do that?
Right now, I just see the panel with the questions. I don't see any question asked.
Okay. This is great. I answered every possible question there is about blockchain. I feel excited.
You have answered in advance everything that everybody thought of. Okay.
So while we wait for questions to populate, I'll share a little more information about the work we're doing here. So we think that digital currency is a powerful and transformative technology for societal and global change. And for those of you who don't know, MIT's mission is to solve the world's biggest problems. So we have a lot of ambition about how we're going to help the world, and one area we think we can help is in financial access. And so we hired Brian Ford out of the Obama White House. Brian was President Obama's advisor on digital currency. We hired the core developers who helped maintain the Bitcoin blockchain, which, as you know, is now one of several blockchains. And so they now work for MIT, and MIT manages an open source effort to maintain Bitcoin and to build other tools on top of digital currencies. So that's a very exciting initiative, and Brian is really doing some fantastic work. He's one of the instructors in our Future Commerce course, so you can also hear more from him in the spring.
We have some questions right now, Dave,
Okay.
so I'm going to read them to you. The first question comes from Michael Petihakis. He's asking if there is currently any MIT startup already using blockchain technology apart from Bitcoin.
There are many, too many to list here. So I would encourage you to take a look at a website called CB Insights. CB Insights tracks new venture activity, and they keep track of a lot of these companies that use blockchain technology. Ripple is one example of many of companies that are not using Bitcoin blockchain, but that are using blockchain technology. Another good resource is Coindesk.com. C-O-I-N-D-E-S-K, Coindesk.com. Other questions?
The next question comes from, we have a couple or more, I would say. The next question comes from Androniki Pavlidou, who is asking, what is your opinion on startups active on blockchain like Chain?
So what we are seeing right now is what I would call the proliferation market. So every new innovative technology goes through a few phases. There's discovery, where people identify a new area. There's exploration, people start to form companies. There's proliferation, where suddenly there are a whole bunch of companies. And then typically in most markets, there's a period of consolidation. So I would argue that right now there is too much money flowing into FinTech startups, but that's a good thing. Essentially what I mean by that is we're experiencing a lot of different ideas that are being tried out, and over the next couple of years we're going to see the winners emerge. So hopefully that, I'm not sure if that was answering your specific question, but if your question is what do I think of blockchain startup companies, I think we're in a healthy period of lots of different ideas being tried out. Not all of them are going to work.
Then the next question comes from Benjamin Dinko, who asks, even if data is encrypted, don't you think that people, and especially companies with highly sensitive data, would be worried of seeing their data being widespread on millions of computers of anonymous people all over the world with such a technology? What do you think of users' acceptance of such a technology in terms of privacy?
So that is an excellent question, and so I'll answer it in parts. First of all, there is an education process required because the scheme that we proposed, this Enigma system that we described here on slide 15, is more secure than the way your data is being handled today. Today, you count on Facebook and Google to keep your data secure. And as we have seen from the many instances of people's servers getting hacked, these big companies are just big targets. So when your data is fully encrypted and fully distributed, it's much more secure and provably mathematically more secure than when it's just sitting on Facebook's server. And I don't mean to pick on Facebook. It could be any one of these companies, any bank. So that, however, requires some education so people can understand why, in fact, this distributed system is more secure. In addition, so you asked about the question of adoption and would companies be nervous. In addition, what we are seeing is that organizations are starting to put together semi-private or private distributed networks. So imagine, for example, if BASF and all of the companies it does business with contribute all of their servers into a giant blockchain network of nodes. So there would still be hundreds of thousands of machines all over the world, if not millions, but they would still be essentially behind a private firewall or a permissioned environment. And so the adoption curve that we're seeing is that the big organizations are thinking about these private or semi-private versions. But the important thing is that there's no one central place where all the data is housed, but instead it's encrypted and it's spread in many places. Next.
The next question comes from Chris Tucci, who asks, for cryptocurrencies, miners need to do work to participate, and they are rewarded with some of the currency. How would that work for non-currencies?
I'll stay on this slide. Thank you, Chris. That's a great question and a point that I left out of mentioning. In order to incentivize people to participate in this distributed network, people would get some sort of reward. So for those of you who didn't follow that, the fundamental backbone of why Bitcoin works and why people will mine Bitcoins is, if you recall, we had that calculation that's being performed in order to create the blockchain. So someone's computer is doing this calculation. And so in order for me to decide that I'm going to let my computer be used for this calculation, I get paid a tiny amount of the Bitcoin that's being created in this transaction. Or if I transfer some Bitcoin from me to Chris Tucci, the calculation performed there, I get a little transaction fee as a Bitcoin miner. So that's just how these cryptocurrencies work. So the way that they work is that they can pay people because they're creating the money in the first place. With data, what we're envisioning is that there would be some economic value attached to being part of this distributed network of data, and so you would get paid in Bitcoin or MIT coin or some other currency in return for performing these calculations as part of the network. Next question.
Next question comes from Petros Gavalakis, who asks, how do you see R3's initiative for a FinTech standard?
So I think R3 is a promising move because it says that and for those of you who don't know, R3 is the industry consortium of some of the largest banks in the world trying to grapple with blockchain. So I think it's a promising move that they have acknowledged that blockchain is important and that they need to do something about it. I think that they're going to have difficulty maintaining cohesion because on the one hand, these banks can cooperate, but on the other hand, they tend to have their own interests as well. And so you may have noticed, for example, recently Goldman Sachs just patented a special kind of blockchain application called Settlecoin, S-E-T-L. And so they're kind of participating in a broader conversation with everyone else, but also doing their own thing. So I think R3 is necessary but not sufficient to help the industry move forward in working through and with this technology. Next question.
The next question, I think that it has been partly answered already, but I will mention it in any case. It comes from Jessica Lua, who would like to know the security and privacy concerns of the distributed ledger technology.
So there are actually several, and we only touched on some of them in the course of the first answer. So one issue that governments are grappling with right now is the issue of what's known as AML, Anti-Money Laundering, and KYC, Know Your Client. So in the traditional old world of money, where there's a central bank who sits in the middle of all of this, we can keep track of who's sending money to who. In the new world, there's a worry that if I can just give money to Jessica directly, how do we know that I'm not a bad guy? How do we know who I am? How do we know who Jessica is? So Bitcoin, for example, has a reputation of being an anonymous currency. It's not actually. It's pseudonymous, and there are ways to begin to pull out identity. But generally speaking, there's a lot of worry by government regulators in particular that alternative currencies could be used for money laundering, for crime, for supporting terrorism, for other bad uses. And my argument would be, and our argument would be, that just like any other new technology, like cell phones and computers and software and anything else, it can be used for good and it can be used for ill. And that there are intelligent efforts and controls that can be put in place to protect citizens' privacy on the one hand, but also protect the security of society on the other. And so a year and a half ago, we hosted a conference here at MIT called The Ecology of Digital Assets, which focused on these issues of digital identity, privacy, and trust. We then worked with the US Treasury Department and 22 Bitcoin companies to put forward a proposed standard around how to address anti-money laundering and KYC compliance while still preserving privacy. There's also more information about our digital privacy effort at trust.mit.edu, and that's a separate conversation, but I will mention that we care very much about the privacy of citizens and have proposed some technology solutions to help ensure digital privacy. Next question.
Next question is about how should asset managers start thinking about blockchain? Again, from Jessica Loa.
Okay, so if I were a large company asset manager, I would be worried. And the large asset management houses that we know certainly are concerned. The reason they should be concerned is because their business model may come under attack from an ability to essentially remove middlemen from the process. There's a separate trend which only tangentially relates to blockchain, which is known as the rise of the RoboAdvisor. This is another trend that we explore in Future Commerce, which is essentially young people and more technologically sophisticated people are perfectly comfortable getting financial advice from a machine. They don't need a person on the other end of the phone or email. And so the banks, these wealth managers, these asset managers' business models are under attack. And so if I were an asset manager, I would be investing heavily in reinventing my own business, both around blockchain and also around other disruptive financial technologies, like creating my own robo-advising offering with better service and better capabilities than the startups are able to offer. Next question.
Next question comes from Spiridon, who asks, you talked about the 50% rule in blockchain. However, if one party gets more than 50% of the peers, he can then manipulate the blockchain. Any idea how is this being handled via legislation or what?
So I will speak lightly on this subject as it is an area that colleagues of mine are much more deeply versed in. But at a high level, right now, Bitcoin has many, many miners. There has been some consolidation lately which has people worried because there are a large number of miners in China, and so some theoreticians have looked at the fact that if you just got a few of these groups of miners together, you could change or game Bitcoin. But I will reassure you that despite all the press that Bitcoin gets, it's really still a very small currency. It's only got about $5 to $7 billion US of capacity versus the trillions and trillions of dollars of the US dollar or of the euro. So it's still a very small experimental currency. But other applications of blockchain, absolutely, there is a concern. Regulators are looking closely at this, to my direct knowledge. But regulation tends to lag behind what the innovators are doing. So we think right now industry and entrepreneurs and academia are probably at the leading edge of trying to figure out what to do about this issue of voting in the 51%. And so we think that's where the action will be. And in fact, helping come up with solutions is another business opportunity for entrepreneurs interested in this area. Next question.
Next question comes from Emily Parker, who says that blockchain seems interesting. Is this innovation being accepted by institutions such as banks who are threatened by its applications, such as Bitcoin, or are they strongly fighting against it?
So that's a great question. As with any new emerging technology, it's a mixed bag. There are many different answers. So most of the largest banks in the world, the names you would recognize, have active R&D efforts underway with blockchain and with alternative currency. Not necessarily Bitcoin, but certainly blockchain. These are in their innovation groups usually, or their chief technology officer's office. So they are anywhere from 5 to 10 years away from being adopted in the mainstream of the bank. The mainstream of the bank, so when I talk to executives who hold those more traditional roles managing, whether it's an investment bank or an asset management firm or a commercial bank, they don't see it as a big enough threat to require their attention today. But at the senior-most levels, the senior executives know that it is a big enough threat tomorrow, and so they're trying to figure out how can they participate, because they know that the change is coming, and they don't want to be left behind. Next question.
Next question comes from Maria Chernikova, who asks, what is the future of Bitcoin as a digital currency, as it is deflationary in nature and limited in issuance? Adopting a single digital blockchain-based currency would entail a currency with different properties. Do you envisage an emergence of such a digital currency?
Absolutely. So this brings up a great point. So the original design of the Bitcoin blockchain, and we all know now based on having taken this seminar that there are many, many kinds of blockchains. The original Bitcoin blockchain has a limit on how many Bitcoins can exist. And the more Bitcoin that you make, the harder it is to make, because these calculations get a lot more complicated. So when I say that Bitcoin is interesting but small, we, and now I will speak on behalf of MIT, institutionally we at MIT believe that there will be other currencies that emerge using blockchain, that Bitcoin will probably end up being one of several. And so actually if you look on one of my first slides at the future commerce themes, every one of those logos there on the top right is a different kind of digital currency. So the second one from the left on the top is Bitcoin, but there's Dogecoin, there's Fluttercoin, there's Ripple, there's all sorts of different kinds of digital currencies. And so people are working now on superior alternative currencies that address the shortcomings of Bitcoin, and my personal suspicion is that one of these other currencies will end up getting a significant share, but it is possible that we will see a proliferation of digital currencies, and that you could have lots of different currencies for different purposes. And because they're digital and interconnected, there may be a way to freely trade between them. So the only certainty is change. We know that there's going to be a lot of change coming. We don't know, candidly, exactly where it's going to land, but we do think that something other than Bitcoin probably will end up, if not several things other than Bitcoin, probably will end up as becoming more widely adopted. We've even seen the Bank of England experimenting with issuing its own currency through blockchain. So it's possible that the European Central Bank will start issuing alternative currencies. Last question.
Last question comes from George Litov, who says that it has been mentioned that the blockchain technology can ruin the business of middlemen entities. They will certainly try to avoid or minimize their losses, which can be a real issue for the technology to develop. What do you think?
So I just want to make sure I heard that middlemen entities, is that what you said?
That's correct, Dave.
Yeah. So You know, the great thing about this technology is that it's open source and it's out there. So the analogy is that it's very hard to put the genie back into the bottle. So middlemen are definitely going to fight because their business is at risk, their profits. All of those companies in the middle of that diagram, all their profits are at risk. So they are going to fight. They're also going to try and compete. But blockchain is so disruptive and so democratic that it's putting more tools into the power of the entrepreneur. And so even with these entrenched interests fighting, as long as you create a valuable product or service offering that really does something for people, and you get it out into people's hands and you make them aware of it, you have an opportunity to create something new. And that's what we find exciting here at MIT, that we're at the dawn of a new era of financial innovation, and you as entrepreneurs and innovators have an opportunity to take the lead in pioneering this new area.
Dave,
So I hope that you will join us on this journey in Future Commerce Online. If not, at least I hope you will stay in touch and keep track of what we're doing. And thank you, Fenoretti and the Future Enterprise Initiative for allowing me to speak today about blockchain and future commerce.